The forest didn't look right, not in the way things sometimes appear strange under moonlight, but wrong, as if the trees themselves had shifted in the dark, the branches twisted unnaturally overhead, tangling into a canopy that blocked out the stars, and the mist rising from the earth was too thick, too cold, the kind of cold that clings to your skin like breath from the dead. The rider tugged his cloak tighter and spurred the horse forward. The hooves clapped dully against the muddy road, and somewhere in the distance, a raven called once, then fell silent. He was late, far later than he should have been, and every instinct in his body told him not to stop. The fog wrapped around him like a winding sheet. It muffled the sound of his own horse. Even the clink of the saddle and reins felt swallowed by the stillness. And then, he heard them. Not in front, not behind. To the side, running parallel, hoofbeats. But not like his own. These were heavier, unshod. They struck the earth with a kind of rhythm, deliberate. Too fast, too close. He glanced to his right, heart now jackhammering behind his ribs. Nothing. Only the twisted trees and the endless fog. He looked forward again. That was when he saw the light, a strange pulsing glow ahead on the road. Faintly orange, like fire, but floating, suspended mid-air and bobbing slightly, like someone holding a lantern. But this was no lantern. The light swelled suddenly, blazing into the unmistakable shape of a burning pumpkin. The eyes carved wide, the mouth open in a silent scream, and behind it, a rider. On a massive black horse, galloping full speed toward him. The figure's armor gleamed dark red in the firelight, streaked with ash and blood, but it was the rider's head, or the absence of it, that broke the world. Where a face should have been, there was nothing, nothing at all. Just a ragged stump of a neck and smoke rising from the cavity like steam from a battlefield corpse. The traveler screamed and turned his horse to flee, but the forest had changed. The road was gone. In its place were graves, dozens, hundreds. Rows of broken tombstones littered the ground on either side, and they were old. Some of them bore dates from centuries ago, others were too worn to read. His horse began to rear and panic, hooves slamming into the shallow soil. He tried to regain control, tried to pull the reins, but the sound came again, the galloping, closer now, louder, louder. Then, a burning light exploded just beside him, a blast of heat. The horse screamed, and something passed through the fog. Not around, not beside, through. The Headless Horseman rode through the traveler as if he were air. No collision, no impact. And yet, the rider felt something in his chest tear, like a soul being yanked. His vision dimmed. His grip on the reins loosened. The last thing he saw before hitting the ground was the horseman turning slowly. No eyes, no face, just the burning jack-o'-lantern where a head should be, and then darkness. No one ever found the traveler's body, not whole anyway. Only his horse returned, bloodied and riderless, galloping into town like it had seen hell. Locals knew better than to ask too many questions. They simply pointed to the old path through the woods and said, "He shouldn't have gone that way. Not after dark. Not when it rides." Because it does ride. Some say it's the ghost of a Hessian soldier, decapitated in battle and damned to roam until he finds his missing head. Others say it's far older, a spirit of vengeance that wears the trappings of war but owes its allegiance to no time or place. But whatever the truth is, it has no face, no mercy, and no end. It rides when the moon is high, when the wind dies, and when the fog begins to speak. You'll hear it before you see it. A single hoofbeat, where there should be silence, and then flames. There is a unique and primal fear reserved for the things we hear in the dark, a sound that does not belong. It is not the sudden crash or the piercing scream that lodges deepest in our psyche, but the rhythmic approaching beat that signals something is coming for you. A sound that has haunted humanity across cultures and across centuries. The sound of hoofbeats on a lonely road in the dead of night. It is a sound that speaks of unstoppable momentum, of a relentless chase that cannot be outrun. It is the sound of the wild, tamed and weaponized, an engine of flesh and bone driven by a singular, unknowable purpose. And when that sound is attached to a figure of folklore, it becomes something more. It becomes the sound of fate itself, galloping towards you through the darkness, each beat a tick of a clock counting down to your end. There is one rider, one spectre, who has captured the Western imagination more than any other. A silhouette of terror, defined not by what it has, but by what it lacks. A being of pure, unreasoning menace, whose missing head somehow makes it more, not less, horrifying. We know him as the Headless Horseman, and his story, as most of us have come to know it, begins in a very specific place. A small, forgotten pocket of the New World, a valley so bewitched by stillness and shadow that it seems to exist outside of time. A place called Sleepy Hollow. To understand the legend, we must first understand the land that birthed it. The Hudson Valley in the late 18th and early 19th centuries was a place of deep and strange contrasts. It was part of a new and boisterous nation, America, yet it was steeped in the old ways, the old blood, and the old fears of its Dutch settlers. They had brought with them their language, their customs, and most importantly, their ghosts. They saw the New World not as an empty space, but as a haunted one, and they populated its forests and streams with the phantoms of their European homeland. The author who would immortalize this region, Washington Irving, described it not as a place, but as a state of mind. He wrote of a drowsy, dreamy influence that seemed to hang over the land, a soporific haze that lulled its inhabitants into a perpetual state of belief. Here, superstitions were not whispers. They were as real as the stone fences and the turning of the seasons. Meteors, shooting stars, the eerie glow of foxfire on rotting wood, and the subtle tricks of light and fog were all seen as omens, as proof that the veil between worlds was perilously thin. This was Tarrytown, a name, according to Irving, given by the housewives of the old country, due to the unfortunate tendency of their husbands to tarry at the village tavern on market days. And nestled within this larger area, like a secret whispered among the hills, was the valley that gave the legend its name, Sleepy Hollow, a place where the world seemed to move more slowly, where time itself felt thick and heavy like the humid summer air. It was, in effect, the perfect crucible for a ghost story, a place already haunted, waiting only for a ghost to name. In 1820, Washington Irving published The Legend of Sleepy Hollow as part of a collection of short stories. Irving was a man of his time, a diplomat, a historian, and one of America's first true literary celebrities. He was part of a generation of thinkers and artists tasked with a monumental job, creating a culture for a country that didn't really have one. While Europe had its ancient castles, its epic poems, and its pantheon of time-worn monsters, America was a blank slate. It had a history, yes, a short, violent, and revolutionary one, but it lacked mythology. It lacked its own ghosts. Irving sought to change that. He looked to the quiet Dutch haunted valleys of his home state and saw the raw material for a new American folklore. He understood that a nation does not truly know itself until it knows what it fears in the dark. He would take the whispers he heard there, the local anxieties and the half-remembered tales, and forge them into something permanent, something tangible. He would give America one of its very first and most enduring monsters. His story centers not on a hero, but on a deeply flawed and relatable man, Ichabod Crane. Ichabod Crane was not from Sleepy Hollow. He was an outsider, a Connecticut schoolmaster who arrived in the valley as a sojourner. Irving paints a comically unflattering picture of him. He is tall, exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, and hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. He was, in body, a walking caricature. But it was his mind that truly defined him. Ichabod was a man of letters, and he carried his small library of books with him like a shield. He was intelligent, but his intelligence was married to a profound and all-consuming superstition. He was a firm believer in the unseen. His prized possession was a tattered copy of Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft, a book he had digested so thoroughly that he believed its horrors as gospel. Every strange sound, every shadow was for Ichabod a potential goblin or spectre. His imagination, fueled by the grim tales he loved to read and share, was both his greatest asset and his fatal flaw. He brought his own ghosts with him into a valley that was already full of them. His purpose in Sleepy Hollow was twofold. As the schoolmaster, he held a position of minor authority, but his true ambition was far greater. He was a man of capacious swallow, both for food and for fortune. His eyes fell upon Katrina van Tassel, the daughter and sole heir of a wealthy Dutch farmer. She was not just a woman to him, she was an prize. She was plump, rosy-cheeked, and most importantly, the key to a kingdom of earthly delights. When Ichabod looked at her father's farm, he saw not fields of grain, but future plates of cakes and crullers. He saw not livestock, but roasted pigs and succulent turkeys. He was a creature of appetite, and Katrina was the gatekeeper to the feast. To win her, however, he had to navigate the complex social world of the Hollow and face its own local champion, Abraham van Brunt, known to all as Brom Bones. If Ichabod was the outsider, the man of the mind, Brom was the insider, the man of the body. He was the village hero, broad-shouldered, boisterous, and brimming with a rough, physical charm. He was famed for his skill on horseback and his love of practical jokes. The entire county looked up to him as a figure of strength and virility. He was the untamed spirit of Sleepy Hollow made flesh, and he too wanted to marry Katrina. The conflict between Ichabod and Brom was a battle of opposites. Ichabod courted Katrina with his quiet, intellectual charm, singing psalms and sharing stories. Brom, unable to compete on this front, resorted to what he knew best: harassment and humiliation. He and his gang of rustic followers smoked out Ichabod's singing school, turned the schoolhouse upside down, and trained a dog to whine whenever Ichabod began to sing. It was a war of cerebral cunning against brute force pranksterism, but Brom's greatest weapon was Ichabod's own imagination. He knew the schoolmaster's weakness for the supernatural, and in Sleepy Hollow there was one story, one spectre, that towered above all others. It was the tale told by the old Dutch wives on long winter evenings, a story that had become the valley's own dark coat of arms. It was the legend of the galloping Hessian. He was, the story went, the ghost of a Hessian trooper, one of the German mercenaries hired by the British during the Revolutionary War. In some nameless battle fought nearby, his head had been carried away by a cannonball. His body was buried in the churchyard, but his spirit, forever searching for its missing head, was said to ride forth every night to the scene of the battle. He was a fixture of the local landscape, a piece of living, or rather, unliving history. The residents of Sleepy Hollow did not just tell his story, they claimed to have heard his ghostly gallop passing by their windows in the dead of night. He was their ghost, the dark legacy of the war that had forged their nation. This spectre became the final piece in the deadly game. The story climaxes on a crisp autumn night. Ichabod attends a lavish party at the Van Tassel farm. He dances, he feasts, he believes he is on the verge of winning Katrina's hand. But something goes wrong. He leaves the party dejected, his proposal apparently refused. Heartbroken and unnerved, he mounts his borrowed horse, a broken-down plough horse named Gunpowder, and begins his lonely journey home. The night itself becomes his enemy. The landscape, once bucolic, transforms into a place of menace. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow thrown by the moon, every hoot of an owl becomes a torment to his overactive imagination. He passes the very places that were the settings of the local ghost stories he had so eagerly consumed: the whining brook, the haunted tree of Major Andre. His fear builds, layer by layer, until he is in a state of near total panic. And then he sees it. By a dark stream, a hulking, shadowy figure on a powerful black horse. It is silent, imposing, and unmoving. As Ichabod approaches, the figure moves with him, matching his pace. It remains in shadow, a mass of darkness. When Ichabod finally gets a clear look at it against the moonlight, his blood runs cold. The figure is headless. On the pommel of its saddle, it carries its own severed head. What follows is one of the most famous chase scenes in literature, a frantic, desperate flight for survival. Ichabod, on his pathetic old horse, is pursued by the silent demonic rider. He remembers the old law: the ghost is bound by the church bridge. If he can just cross it, he will be safe. He drives Gunpowder onward, the hoofbeats of the black steed thundering behind him. He reaches the bridge, crosses it in a desperate clatter of hooves, and dares to look back, expecting the chase to end. But it does not. The spectre rises in its stirrups and hurls its severed head at him. Ichabod sees it flying through the air, a grotesque missile of flesh and bone. He tries to duck, but it strikes him with a tremendous crash. He is thrown from his horse and tumbles into the dust, and the world goes black. The next morning, there is no sign of Ichabod Crane. His horse, Gunpowder, is found wandering peacefully, the saddle trampled. By the brook near the bridge, they find Ichabod's hat, and beside it, the shattered remains of a pumpkin. Ichabod Crane was never seen in Sleepy Hollow again. The genius of Irving's tale lies in this final ambiguity. He gives us two possible endings. The old Dutch wives, of course, insist that Ichabod was carried off by the Headless Horseman. His story became yet another terrifying tale to be told by the fire, a warning to all outsiders who dared to tread in their haunted valley. But Irving also offers a more rational explanation. A farmer who had been to New York later claimed to have seen Ichabod, alive and well. He had simply fled the valley in terror and embarrassment, later becoming a lawyer and eventually a judge. In this version, the horseman was merely Brom Bones in disguise, using the local legend to terrify his rival and win Katrina for himself. The thrown head was nothing more than a pumpkin. Irving never tells us which is true. He leaves the question hanging in the air, allowing the reader to choose between rational explanation and supernatural horror. And in doing so, he created something more powerful than a simple ghost story. He created a true American myth. It was a story born from the trauma of its founding war, set in the deep, unknown wilderness of a new continent, and leaving us with a mystery that can never be fully solved. It took the ephemeral whispers of a Dutch farming community and turned them into a permanent fixture of the national consciousness. Whether he was a ghost of war or a prankster in a cloak, the horseman began a ride that night that has never truly ended. He galloped out of the pages of a book and into the very heart of American folklore. The story of Ichabod Crane, as Washington Irving tells it, leaves us standing at a crossroads between two realities. In one direction lies the path of supernatural horror, a world where headless specters ride the night and carry off terrified schoolmasters. In the other lies the path of human reason, a world of pranks and pumpkins, where the only monster is the jealousy of a spurned lover. For over 200 years, we have been invited to choose. But perhaps this choice is a false one. Perhaps the most intriguing path is a third, more shadowed road that winds between the other two. It suggests that even if Brom Bones was the one in the cloak that fateful night, he was merely playing a part in a much older and more genuine drama. A ghost story does not simply spring from nothing. It needs a seed. It needs a memory buried in the soil, waiting for the right conditions to grow. To find the true origin of Sleepy Hollow's phantom, we must look past the shattered pumpkin and ask a more fundamental question. Where did a character like Brom Bones even get the idea? The answer requires us to dig into the blood-soaked earth of the American Revolution. The galloping Hessian of the story was not a random invention. He was a direct echo of a very real and deeply feared figure from that conflict. To the people of the Hudson Valley, the Hessian soldier was no mere storybook goblin. He was a living nightmare that had marched through their fields and villages, a symbol of foreign invasion and the brutal machinations of kings. To understand their fear, we must first understand who these men were. They were not British. They were Germans, subjects of a handful of small, impoverished German states, most famously Hesse-Kassel. In the 18th century, a prince's power was often measured by the size of his army, but maintaining such an army was ruinously expensive. A grim but profitable solution was found: renting them out. These princes ran their states like military recruitment agencies, and their primary export was soldiers. The Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, Frederick II, made an immense fortune by leasing his highly disciplined army to the British Crown to help suppress the American rebellion. These were not volunteers in the modern sense. They were professional soldiers, born into a system where military service was an expectation and a trade. They were rigorously trained, impeccably disciplined, and renowned throughout Europe for their professionalism. To the British commanders, they were a godsend, reliable, hardened troops to bolster their own ranks. But to the American colonists, they were something else entirely. They were mercenaries, fighting not for a cause, a king, or a country they believed in, but for money. This, in the idealistic rhetoric of the Revolution, made them monstrous. They were seen as the ultimate tools of tyranny, men without conscience, shipped across an ocean to kill for a paycheck. They spoke a different language, a guttural tongue that sounded harsh and alien to English and Dutch ears. They practiced different customs. They were, in every sense of the word, the other. An invading force of strangers whose motives were seen as inherently corrupt. Their appearance alone was enough to inspire dread. The grenadiers wore tall, imposing brass-fronted caps called mitres, designed to make them appear taller and more intimidating. The elite rifle corps, the Jaegers, meaning hunters, wore dark green uniforms and were known for their deadly accuracy and stealth. They were spectres of the forest, moving silently through the trees, their reputation for lethality preceding them. Imagine being a farmer in a quiet valley and seeing these men, these perfect soldiers from a distant, dark European fairy tale, marching in perfect formation down your quiet country lane. The fear would have been profound. This fear was the fertile ground. The specific seed of the legend was planted during the chaos of the New York and New Jersey campaign. In the autumn of 1776, the war was raging across the Hudson Valley. On October 28th, the Battle of White Plains erupted just a few miles from Tarrytown. It was a brutal, chaotic engagement, a landscape of cannon smoke, musket fire, and bayonet charges. It was here, according to local history and military lore, that the single, horrific event occurred that would echo for centuries. During an artillery barrage, an American cannonball, a solid sphere of iron weighing 6 or more pounds, found its mark. It struck a Hessian artilleryman or dragoon with unimaginable force. A cannonball does not cut cleanly. It is a blunt, destructive force of pure kinetic energy. It would have obliterated the soldier's head, taking it from his shoulders in a single, explosive instant. The image of this death is the stuff of nightmares. Soldiers in the 18th century were drilled to stand ramrod straight, to hold their position no matter the horror around them. It is said that the body of the decapitated Hessian remained standing for a moment, a grotesque statue in uniform, held upright by sheer spinal reflex and military discipline before collapsing to the ground. This one soldier's death in a battle that claimed hundreds of lives became infamous. It was a sight so uniquely ghastly that it seared itself into the memory of all who witnessed it or heard the story told later around the campfires. His body, like so many others, was likely buried in a mass grave, without ceremony. But the people of the valley, the Dutch farmers and their families who had to live on the land where this blood was spilt, would not forget. The story of the soldier who lost his head became a local touchstone, a way of encapsulating the sheer, random brutality of the war they had endured. The war eventually ended, the armies marched away, but the memory remained, clinging to the landscape like the morning fog in the hollows. This is where history begins, its slow, strange metamorphosis into folklore. The process is fueled by a cocktail of powerful human emotions, trauma, guilt, and a deep-seated fear of the unquiet dead. A community that has witnessed such violence cannot simply move on. The trauma lingers. They see the battlefield in their fields. They remember the smoke in the autumn haze. And they tell stories. They tell stories to make sense of the senseless, to give shape to their anxieties. The anonymous Hessian soldier, a real man who died a real and terrible death, begins to change. He is no longer just a victim of war. He becomes a symbol of it. Central to this transformation is the ancient and universal human belief in the sanctity of burial. Across countless cultures, a proper burial is essential for the soul's journey into the afterlife. To be left unburied or buried incomplete is to be cursed. A spirit without its body, or a body without its head, the seat of identity and reason, cannot rest. It is trapped between worlds, forever bound to the place of its traumatic demise. The headless Hessian, therefore, was not merely dead. He was damned to be restless. His spirit, the locals would whisper, was still out there, searching. It was looking for the part of itself that had been stolen by the violence of men. His nightly ride was not one of rage, but of a desperate, eternal quest for wholeness. This restlessness was then colored by the colonial perception of who he was. Had the victim been a local boy, a hero of the Continental Army, His ghost might have been a tragic, protective figure, a sorrowful guardian of his home. But the ghost was a Hessian. He was the enemy, the invader, the foreign other. And so, his restlessness was interpreted not as tragic, but as menacing. His search for his head was seen as a potential threat to the living. What might such a vengeful spirit do to the people of the nation that had defeated him? His presence was a reminder that the past was not truly past, that the violence of the war had left a permanent stain, a vengeful phantom that now roamed their lands as if it still owned them. This specific fear of the Hessian ghost was magnified by the broader anxieties of colonial life. America in the 18th century was a place defined by its edges. The civilized world was a thin, fragile crust on the edge of a vast, dark, and seemingly infinite wilderness. The forests that surrounded places like Sleepy Hollow were not the tranquil parks we know today. They were places of profound mystery and real danger. They concealed predators, both animal and human, and were believed by many to be the domain of older, non-Christian spirits. The colonists had brought their own European folklore with them, their beliefs in goblins, imps, and demonic figures of the forest, and projected them onto this new, untamed landscape. The dark woods were the natural habitat for a monster, and a ghostly rider fit perfectly into this theater of fear. The horseman was not just a ghost of the war, he was a ghost of the wilderness itself. He also represents a fear of the past they had tried to escape. The revolution was, in essence, an attempt to sever ties with the old world, its monarchies, its ancient hatreds, its cyclical violence. America was meant to be a new Eden, a fresh start. But the Headless Hessian is a ghost of Europe. He is a product of its princely greed and its endless wars, now transplanted onto American soil. He is a terrifying reminder that you cannot simply outrun history. The sins of the old world have a long shadow, and they had followed the colonists across the ocean, now galloping through their new, supposedly innocent homeland. He is the price of war, the bill for revolution come to collect in the dead of night, and so all the elements were in place. You have the specific, unforgettable historical event, the decapitation of a soldier in a nearby battle. You have the perfect subject, a foreign mercenary, already feared and demonized by the local population. You have the powerful folkloric engine of the unquiet dead, a spirit cursed to be restless because it was buried incomplete. And you have the perfect setting, a superstitious, isolated community surrounded by a dark and mysterious wilderness. A community still processing the trauma of a recent war. These elements swirled together in the collective consciousness of the Hudson Valley for decades. The story of the Headless Hessian became a piece of ambient dread, a ghost story that belonged to the land itself. It was told by grandparents to their grandchildren, by locals to travelers, a warning to stay off the roads after dark, especially near the old church bridge. It was real to them, a piece of their living history. Washington Irving did not invent the Headless Horseman. He discovered him. He was a folklorist and a historian as much as a storyteller. He heard the whispers, collected the fragments of local lore, and recognized the terrifying power of this homegrown specter. He took the raw, unpolished ghost of the Hudson Valley, the tragic, restless, and menacing spirit of a real fallen soldier, and gave him a name, a narrative, and a nemesis in the form of Ichabod Crane. He polished the fear until it shone with a literary gleam. The real story of the Headless Horseman is, in many ways, more haunting than the fictional one. It reminds us that the most enduring monsters are not born from fantasy, but are ghosts of real-world horror. They are the personification of our collective traumas, the embodiment of our deepest anxieties. The Galloping Hessian was not just a story to frighten children, he was the memory of war, refusing to stay buried. He was the ghost of a real man, whose violent death was so profound it tore a hole in the fabric of reality, allowing his spectre to ride out of the battlefield and into legend. The hoofbeats Ichabod Crane heard were not just the sound of his own fear, they were an echo, faint but clear, of a cannonball fired half a century before, an echo that has never truly faded. The ghost of the decapitated Hessian soldier provides us with a powerful and tangible anchor. It grounds the legend of Sleepy Hollow in the real recorded history of the American Revolution, tying it to a specific time, a specific place, and a specific trauma. It is a satisfying explanation offering a clear lineage from battlefield horror to local folklore, but it is also, in its own way, incomplete. Because the story of a man killed by a cannonball does not automatically become the story of a spectral rider who haunts the night. The raw material of history, no matter how gruesome, must be shaped by the human imagination. And the imagination does not work in a vacuum. It works with the tools it already has. The European colonists who settled the Hudson Valley, the Dutch, the English, the Scots-Irish, had emptied their pockets when they arrived in the New World, but their minds were far from empty. They brought with them a vast and heavy luggage of folklore, a collection of monsters, spirits, and omens that had been accumulating for 1,000 years. When they witnessed the horrors of the war, when they heard the story of the soldier who lost his head, their minds reached for a pre-existing file. They slotted this new American horror into an ancient European template. The Hessian soldier became a ghost, but the kind of ghost he became was determined by the stories they already knew. To find the true ancestor of the Headless Horseman, we must cross the Atlantic and travel back in time into the misty, peat-smoked darkness of Old World Europe. We must look for the original rider. Our journey takes us to Ireland, to the loneliest back roads and the most desolate moors. Here, the Headless Horseman is not a local ghost born of war. He is something far older, far more powerful, and infinitely more terrifying. He is not a haunted soul. He is a force of nature. They call him the Dullahan. The Dullahan is one of the most feared beings in the entire Irish fairy faith. He is the embodiment of a death omen, a tangible harbinger of mortality. Like his American descendant, he is a headless rider on a black horse. But this is where the pleasantries of comparison end. The Hessian ghost is a tragic figure, a victim forever searching for what he lost. The Dullahan is a predator. His purpose is not to search. His purpose is to end. He is described with a consistency that is chilling. He rides a powerful, snorting black steed, its eyes glowing with a malevolent fire, its hooves striking sparks from the stone. But it is the rider himself who is the true spectacle of horror. He holds his own severed head not on the pommel of his saddle, but tucked securely under one arm. The head itself is not a clean flesh and blood object. It is said to be the color and texture of stale, moldy cheese or decaying dough. The flesh is pulled back into a hideous, lipless grin that stretches from ear to ear, a permanent expression of grim satisfaction. The eyes are small and black, constantly darting about, scanning the darkness with a supernatural perception that sees through all gloom and shadow. The head, it is said, can be used as a lantern, its unholy glow illuminating the path for its rider. And the Dullahan is not unarmed. He does not carry a sword or an axe. His weapon of choice is something far more personal, far more grotesque. As a whip to urge his steed onward, he carries a human spine. The appearance of the Dullahan is not a random haunting, it is a summons. He rides on specific nights, often around the times of Irish festivals. He will thunder through the countryside, all gates and locks flying open before him as he passes. He is an unstoppable force. To witness him is to have your fate sealed, for the Dullahan does not like to be seen. It is said that if you look upon him, he will lash out your eyes with his spine whip or douse you in a basin of blood. But the true terror comes when he stops, when the thunder of his horse's hooves falls silent and he pulls the steed to a halt before a home. It is then that he lifts his decaying head, and with a voice that is the sound of death itself, he calls out a name. Once that name is called, that person's soul is immediately forfeit. There is no escape, no appeal. The Dullahan has marked you for death, and your time in the mortal world is over. There is only one thing that can hold this creature at bay: gold. Even a single gold pin is said to be enough to make the Dullahan and his steed vanish, roaring in frustration. The reason for this is lost to time, but it is believed that gold, as a pure and incorruptible earthly element, holds a power that this supernatural being cannot overcome. Comparing this entity to Sleepy Hollow's ghost reveals the profound taming that took place. The Hessian ghost is a local problem, bound to a specific bridge and a specific backstory. The Dullahan is a cosmic terror, a fundamental part of the spiritual landscape. The Hessian is looking for his head. The Dullahan is using his. The Hessian can be outrun, the Dullahan cannot. The American ghost is a mystery to be solved. The Irish one is a verdict to be accepted. The roots of the Dullahan himself stretch back into the deepest, darkest soil of pre-Christian Ireland. Many folklorists believe he is a faded memory of an ancient and powerful Celtic god, Crom Dubh, meaning the dark, bent one. Crom Dubh was a fertility god, but fertility in the ancient world was often a bloody business. He demanded sacrifice. His preferred method, it is believed, was decapitation. Each year, a human life would be offered to ensure the health of the crops and the community. When Christianity arrived in Ireland, it did not erase the old gods, it demoted them. Powerful deities like Crom Dubh were recast as demons, monsters, and fairies. The god who demanded heads became the headless monster who collected souls. The Dullahan, then, is not just a fairy tale. He is the ghost of a forgotten religion. This headless rider is not an isolated phenomenon. The Dullahan is merely the most vivid and terrifying example of a much broader European archetype, the spectral rider. As we move from Celtic lands into the Germanic and Scandinavian world, the solo rider often joins a ghastly entourage. He becomes part of the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt is one of Europe's most pervasive and powerful myths. It is a ghostly procession of hunters, spectral horsemen, hounds with eyes of fire, tearing across the night sky in a furious, storm-like chase. To witness the hunt was a catastrophic omen, foretelling war, plague, or, if you were truly unlucky, your own imminent death. To hear the baying of its hounds and the pounding of its hooves was to hear the sound of doom itself. The leader of this hunt varied by region, but was always a figure of immense mythological weight. In much of the Germanic world, he was Woden, or Odin, the All-Father, the god of poetry, wisdom, and magic, but also the god of the berserk fury and the glorious dead. It was Odin who led the fallen warriors of Valhalla on this spectral ride, a reminder of his power over both the living and the dead. In England, the leader was sometimes identified as Herne the Hunter, a horned spectre of Windsor Forest. In parts of Britain, it was King Arthur himself, leading a spectral host. The Headless Horseman can be seen as a splinter from this great, terrifying procession. He is a solo hunter, a single embodiment of the doom that the full hunt represents. He carries the same aura of supernatural dread, the same association with a stormy, relentless pursuit in the dead of night. He is the Wild Hunt, distilled into a single, terrifying figure. The colonists from England and the Netherlands would have known these stories. The idea of a ghostly rider as a herald of death was already a part of their cultural DNA. But the most direct and potent connection comes when we return to Germany, the homeland of the Hessian soldiers themselves. The folklore of Germany is rich with tales of headless spectres. The Brothers Grimm, in their work to preserve German oral traditions, recorded multiple accounts of such figures. There is Hans Jagenteufel, John the Hunting Devil of Brunswick, and tales of a headless horseman who haunts the woods near Dresden, doomed to ride until Judgment Day. This creates a staggering and profound irony. The Hessian soldier who was decapitated at White Plains did not just become a monster in the eyes of the American colonists. He became a monster straight out of his own culture's nightmares. The German mercenaries grew up in a land where the headless rider was already a known and feared figure. When one of their own met this uniquely horrific fate, the story would have had a dual resonance. To the colonists, he was the ghost of their enemy. To his own comrades, he was something even more terrifying. He was a cautionary tale from their own folklore, brought to life in the bloody mud of a foreign war. He was proof that their own ghosts had followed them to this new world. So when we re-examine the story of the galloping Hessian of Sleepy Hollow, we see it in a new light. The event of the decapitation was the spark, but the deep, ancient reservoir of European folklore was the fuel. When the Dutch and English settlers of the Hudson Valley told the story of the dead soldier, they unconsciously shaped it to fit the patterns they already knew. The tragic soldier was imbued with the menace of the Dullahan and the ominous power of the Wild Hunt. They saw a headless body, and their collective imagination provided the black horse, the nightly ride, and the vengeful purpose. Washington Irving, whether he knew it or not, was the final link in this incredible chain of mythological transmission. He acted as a cultural filter. He took this ancient, primal European archetype, the pagan death god, the harbinger of doom, the leader of the spectral hunt, and gave it a new American identity. He stripped away the overt paganism of the Dullahan and the epic scale of the wild hunt and grounded the terror in the specific, tangible history of his own young nation. He dressed the ancient monster in a Hessian uniform. The Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow is, therefore, a creature of many layers. On the surface, he is a ghost of war, the product of a cannonball and a revolution. Beneath that, he is a figure from deep European folklore, a symbol of death and doom that has terrified people for centuries. And beneath that, he is something even more primal, the ghost of a forgotten god who demanded sacrifice. This is what gives him his enduring power. He is not just a local legend, he is an echo of 1,000 years of fear. His hoofbeats, pounding on the wooden church bridge in the quiet American valley, are the same hoofbeats that once echoed across Irish bogs and German forests. He is a testament to the fact that you can build a new world, but you cannot escape the old monsters. They will always find a way to cross the ocean. They just find new clothes to wear. The journey of the Headless Horseman from the blood-soaked battlefields of the American Revolution back to the misty, pagan landscapes of ancient Europe reveals a profound and chilling lineage. It shows us that the spectre of Sleepy Hollow is not an isolated phenomenon, but the American branch of a very old and very dark family tree. The Hessian ghost, the Irish Dullahan, and the Germanic leader of the wild hunt are all variations on a theme, cultural cousins bound by the shared terror of a relentless spectral rider. This alone would be a remarkable case of mythological transmission, but the story does not end there. If we widen our lens, if we look beyond the familiar borders of Western folklore, an even more startling picture begins to emerge. The fear of the ghostly rider is not confined to Europe and its cultural descendants. It is a fear that seems to be woven into the very fabric of human consciousness, a nightmare that has been dreamed independently by cultures all over the world. The image of a threatening entity on horseback, galloping through the liminal spaces between civilization and chaos, is a near universal archetype. It suggests that this fear is not merely learned, it is innate. It speaks to something deep within us, a primal anxiety that transcends language, geography, and time. To explore this, we must leave the familiar comforts of Western myth and travel east to the vast and diverse subcontinent of India. Here, amidst a pantheon of gods, demons, and spirits that is one of the most complex in human history, we find our rider once again. In various regional folklores, particularly in parts of North India and what is now Pakistan, there are tales of the Shaitan Ghora, or the satanic horse. These stories often feature a ghostly or demonic horse, sometimes riderless, its eyes burning like coals, its breath like smoke. It is seen as a harbinger of ill fortune, its appearance signaling that a great tragedy or a personal doom is imminent. However, in some variations, the horse is not riderless. It is mounted by a spectral figure, often a jinn or a malevolent spirit of the wilderness. Sometimes this figure is described as skeletal, a being of pure malevolence. In other, more specific tales, particularly those told in rural areas to frighten travelers away from dangerous paths after dark, the rider is described as headless. This headless rider, much like his Western counterparts, is seen as an aggressive and predatory spirit. He is not a sorrowful ghost, but a being of pure menace, said to chase down those unfortunate enough to be out on the roads at night, driving them mad with terror or leading them to their deaths. The horse itself is a creature of immense symbolic power in Indian culture, associated with royalty, war, and divine power. The famous Ashvamedha, or horse sacrifice, was an ancient Vedic ritual that asserted the power of a king over his domain. A horse that roams freely and yet is controlled by a supernatural master represents a perversion of this power. It is chaos given form, a symbol of royal authority that has been usurped by the forces of the underworld. The headlessness of the rider adds another layer of terror, signifying a being that operates outside the bounds of reason and identity, a pure, destructive impulse given a mount and a mission. If we journey further into the vast steppes and dark forests of Slavic folklore, we encounter another figure who shares a deep kinship with our rider, Koschei the Deathless. Koschei is one of the great villains of Eastern European myth, a powerful and malevolent sorcerer who cannot be killed by conventional means. His soul is hidden, separated from his body, famously nested within a needle, which is inside an egg, which is inside a duck, which is inside a hare, which is locked in an iron chest buried under a great oak tree on a mythical island. This separation of soul from body makes him, in a symbolic sense, a headless being. His physical form can be destroyed, but his essence, his life force, his identity, exists elsewhere. He is a being whose consciousness is fundamentally detached from his physical presence. While not always depicted as headless, Koschei is very often portrayed as a skeletal horseman. He rides a magical steed, sometimes described as having supernatural speed or the ability to speak. He is an abductor, a hoarder of treasure, and a bringer of unnatural, unending winter. He represents a life that defies the natural cycle of death and decay, a state of being that is both immortal and profoundly unholy. The image of this skeletal figure on horseback, a being whose life force is not where it should be, resonates deeply with the core terror of the Headless Horseman. Both are figures of unnatural persistence, their physical forms divorced from the essence of what makes them alive. They are animated shells, driven by a dark and inscrutable will, their very existence a violation of the natural order. Both are masters of the chase, symbols of a fate from which mortals cannot easily escape. Now let us cross the Pacific, to the Americas, but this time to the lands south of the Rio Grande. In the rich tapestry of Latin American folklore, a blend of indigenous beliefs and the superstitions of Spanish and Portuguese colonists, our rider appears once more. Across various countries, from Mexico down to Argentina, there are local legends of the Jinete sin cabeza, the Headless Horseman. The details of these stories vary from region to region, adapting to the local landscape and history, but the core elements remain remarkably consistent. The rider is almost always a figure of punishment or restless vengeance. In some versions, he is a greedy rancher who was cursed for his cruelty to his workers, or for some terrible sin against God. In others, he is a soldier who was decapitated in one of the many wars of independence or civil conflicts that have marked the continent's history. This direct link to historical trauma, specifically the trauma of war and social injustice, mirrors the American legend of the Hessian soldier with uncanny precision. In these tales, the Jinete is doomed to ride for eternity, forever searching for his lost head or carrying it with him as a lantern. He haunts lonely rural roads, cattle trails, and the vast, empty spaces of the Pampas or the Llanos. His appearance is an omen of death, and he is said to chase down lone travelers, particularly those who are out at night for immoral purposes, drunkards, adulterers, or criminals. He becomes a kind of supernatural enforcer, a bogeyman who polices the boundaries of social morality. The power of this image in Latin America is tied to the central role of the horse and the horseman in its culture. The figure of the charro in Mexico, the gaucho in Argentina, the llanero in Venezuela. These are potent national symbols of freedom, independence, and mastery over the vast, untamed land. The horseman is the embodiment of masculine power and control. To render this figure headless is to create a powerful symbol of that control being lost, of power turning monstrous and self-destructive. The Headless Horseman is the dark doppelganger of the national hero, a symbol of what happens when the celebrated ideals of honor and freedom curdle into greed, violence, and eternal damnation. So what are we to make of this? How can it be that cultures separated by vast oceans and millennia of history all independently generated the same specific, terrifying image? The theory of a single, ancient prototype that spread with human migration, a proto-Indo-European headless horseman, is compelling, but it cannot account for the figure's appearance in the indigenous folklore of the Americas. The answer must lie deeper, not in a shared story, but in a shared psychology. The Headless Horseman is not a meme that went viral. He is a monster that we build from a universal blueprint of fear. Let us deconstruct the blueprint. It has two essential components, the horseman and the headlessness. First, the horseman. For most of human history, a man on horseback was a symbol of overwhelming power. To the person on foot, the rider was faster, stronger, and occupied a physically superior position. He was an agent of speed and force. He could cover vast distances, appear as if from nowhere, and ride you down with impunity. He represented the power of the military, the aristocrat, the conqueror, the messenger of a king. The sound of his approach was the sound of authority, of news, good or bad, arriving at a speed that was, for its time, breathtaking. A horseman is an intrusion, a disruption of the slow, walking pace of normal life. A ghostly horseman, then, is the ultimate disruption. He is the power of the conqueror combined with the terror of the supernatural. He is a force that cannot be fought, a message that cannot be ignored. He is the ultimate symbol of a power you cannot hope to match. Second, and more profoundly, the headlessness. The human head is the seat of identity. It contains our face, the primary means by which we recognize one another and communicate emotion. It contains our eyes, the windows to the soul, through which we perceive the world and project our intent. It contains our mouth, the source of our voice, our reason, our pleas, our curses. It contains our brain, the organ of thought, logic, personality, and consciousness itself. To remove the head is to remove all of these things. A headless being is, by definition, a being without identity. It has no face to read, no eyes to meet. It cannot be recognized. It is anonymous, and therefore it can represent anyone or anything. A headless being has no voice. It cannot be reasoned with, pleaded with, or bargained with. It is deaf to mercy. Its motives are utterly opaque. Why is it chasing you? What does it want? There is no way to know, and this absolute uncertainty is a source of profound psychological terror. A headless being has no brain. It is a creature of pure, unthinking impulse. It operates on a level below reason, like a force of nature, a flood, a fire, an earthquake. It is not evil in the way a human villain is evil, because it lacks the capacity for moral choice. It is simply a relentless, destructive force. Its headlessness is a visual guarantee that it will not stop, it will not think, it will not feel, it will only do. When you combine these two elements, you create a perfect monster. You take the symbol of overwhelming physical power, the horseman, and you fuse it with the symbol of absolute, unreasoning, and unknowable intent, the headlessness. The result is a creature that embodies one of our deepest and most primal fears, the fear of being pursued by a powerful, relentless force whose motives we cannot comprehend and whose actions we cannot appeal. He is the ultimate predator. This is why he appears everywhere. Every culture has its symbols of power, and for most, the horseman was one of them. Every culture understands the horror of decapitation and the symbolic weight of the head. Every culture has its lonely roads, its dark forests, its liminal spaces where the rules of civilization seem to thin, and every culture has a need for bogeymen, for figures that embody the consequences of transgression or the random cruelty of fate. The Headless Horseman is the perfect vessel for these fears. He is a blank slate of a monster, and each culture projects its own specific anxieties onto his missing face. In America, he is the ghost of a war that defined the nation. In Ireland, he is the ghost of a religion that was violently suppressed. In Latin America, he is the ghost of colonial greed and injustice. In India, he is a spirit of the untamed, chaotic wilderness. He is always the same, and yet he is always different. He is the universal nightmare, dressed in local clothing. The galloping Hessian of Sleepy Hollow is not merely an American legend. He is America's contribution to a global pantheon of terror, our own unique entry into the worldwide brotherhood of the Headless Riders. He is proof that no matter where you are on Earth, there is always a fear of what you might meet on the road when the sun goes down and you hear the sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind. We have tracked the Headless Horseman across continents and through centuries. We have followed the echo of his hoofbeats from the quiet, haunted hollows of New York, back to the battlefields of the Revolution, and further still, into the ancient, myth-drenched landscapes of Europe and beyond. We have seen how this singular figure of terror is not an isolated spectre, but a member of a global fraternity of ghostly riders, a universal archetype born from a shared blueprint of fear. We have deconstructed the narrative, peeled back the layers of history, and analyzed the folkloric connections. But to truly understand the power of this legend, to grasp why it clings so tenaciously to our collective psyche, we must now move beyond the story itself. We must venture into the far more abstract and far more terrifying realm of symbolism. The horseman, in all his forms, is more than just a character in a ghost story. He is a vessel, a symbol freighted with some of humanity's most profound and deeply buried anxieties. The horror he inspires is not just a cheap thrill, a momentary jump scare. It is a deep philosophical dread that resonates with our understanding of life, death, identity, and the very nature of consciousness. To understand him, we must perform our own act of decapitation. We must separate the literal from the metaphorical and examine the symbolic meaning of losing one's head. On the most primal, biological level, the fear of decapitation is self-evident. It is the fear of the ultimate, irreversible injury, a form of death so absolute and spectacular that it stands apart from all others. It is not a quiet fading away, it is a violent sundering. The head is the command center of the body, the seat of the self. To lose it is to be instantly and totally annihilated. This physical revulsion is hardwired into us, a survival instinct that recoils from the very thought of such a fate. Ghost stories, at their best, tap into these primal fears, taking a real-world horror and giving it a supernatural afterlife. The Headless Horseman is the walking, riding embodiment of this ultimate physical violation. He is the ghost of a nightmare that every living creature with a neck instinctively understands. But the fear runs much deeper than the physical. The head is not just a biological necessity, it is a symbolic one. It is where we locate the I in our own bodies. When we think of ourselves, we picture our face. When we think of others, we picture theirs. The face is the nexus of communication, the canvas upon which we display our emotions, joy, sorrow, anger, surprise. It is the primary tool we use to build trust, to show empathy, to form connections. Our eyes meet, we read the subtle cues of a smile or a frown, and we build the intricate web of social reality. A being without a face is a being outside of this reality. It is a locked door, a blank wall. It offers no point of connection, no hope of empathy. You cannot look into its eyes to gauge its intent. You cannot read its expression to know if it is friend or foe. It is a void of social information. This is why so many modern horror icons, from Michael Myers to Jason Voorhees, are masked. The mask functions as a form of symbolic decapitation, erasing the human face and replacing it with a blank, implacable surface. It turns a human being into an unstoppable it. The Headless Horseman is the logical endpoint of this concept. He does not just wear a mask, he is the absence of a face itself. He is pure, unreadable, and therefore uncontrollable intent. This leads us to the psychological terror of trying to reason with the unreasonable. Human conflict, for the most part, operates on a logic of cause and effect, of action and reaction. We try to understand the motives of our adversaries. We bargain, we plead, we threaten, we appeal to a shared sense of humanity or a common set of rules. All of these strategies depend on the assumption that our opponent has a mind, a consciousness that we can interact with. The Headless Horseman systematically dismantles this assumption. How do you reason with a being that has no brain? How do you appeal to the humanity of a creature that has no face? How do you beg for mercy from something that has no ears to hear you and no voice with which to grant it? The horseman represents a form of menace that is absolute because it is deaf to all negotiation. He is not an antagonist in the traditional sense. He is a living catastrophe. You cannot reason with a hurricane. You cannot bargain with a plague. You can only run. His headlessness is a chilling guarantee of his implacability. He is the physical manifestation of a deaf and silent universe, a universe that does not care about your pleas or your justifications. He is the rider of a fate that cannot be changed. In folklore across the world, this theme of the unreasoning dead is deeply embedded. The headless ghost is a recurring figure, and its motivations are almost always tied to the concept of unfinished business. A proper death involves a full transition from one state of being to another. A violent or shameful death, particularly one that results in mutilation, disrupts this process. The spirit is left in a state of tormenting incompletion. The ghost who seeks its head is, on a symbolic level, seeking the restoration of its identity. It is trying to put itself back together, to become whole again so that it can finally be at peace. This quest can be tragic, the ghost a figure of pity, but it can also be terrifying. A being so consumed by its own lack, so obsessed with its own incompleteness, may have no regard for the living. The living are an obstacle, a distraction, or, in the most horrifying versions of the tale, a potential source for a replacement. The ghost might not just be looking for its head, it might be looking for a head. This transforms the figure from a tragic victim into a predatory monster. It is no longer just trying to reclaim its past self, it is threatening to steal your future one. The spectre of Sleepy Hollow plays brilliantly with this ambiguity. Is he the tragic Hessian, forever reenacting the moment of his death? Or is he a menace who mistakes a pumpkin or Ichabod's own head for the one he lost? The uncertainty is the key to the horror. Furthermore, the symbolism of decapitation extends beyond the literal and into the metaphorical. To lose one's head is a common idiom for losing one's rational composure, for giving in to panic, passion, or rage. Ichabod Crane is a perfect example of this. Long before he ever meets the horseman, he has already lost his head to superstition and fear. His mind, inflamed by dreadful pleasure, transforms every shadow and sound into a goblin or a spectre. He is a man who is decapitated by his own imagination. The physical appearance of the Headless Horseman on the road is merely the external manifestation of Ichabod's internal state. The monster he meets in the dark is a monster he has been building in his own mind all along. The horseman is a mirror, reflecting the protagonist's own loss of reason back at him in the most terrifying way imaginable. This theme can be broadened to a societal level. A community, a nation, can also lose its head. It can give in to mass hysteria, to irrational fear, to a collective madness that tramples reason and justice. The historical context of the Hessian soldier speaks to this. War is, in many ways, a form of societal decapitation. It is a state in which reason is subordinated to violence, in which diplomacy fails and the headless logic of destruction takes over. The Headless Horseman, as a ghost of war, is a symbol of this collective insanity. He is the enduring spirit of a time when the nation lost its head, a haunting reminder of the brutal, unthinking violence upon which it was founded. He represents the dark, irrational impulses that lie just beneath the surface of civilized society, always waiting for a moment of crisis to gallop forth. The head is also the seat of honor. In many ancient cultures, particularly Celtic and Germanic ones, taking the head of a defeated enemy was the ultimate act of victory and domination. It was proof of one's prowess in battle, a trophy that simultaneously honored the victor and shamed the vanquished. To be decapitated was to suffer the ultimate humiliation. The heads of enemies or criminals were often displayed on pikes at the gates of a city, a stark warning to all who would challenge its authority. A headless ghost, therefore, is often a ghost of shame. It is a spirit whose earthly end was marked by profound dishonor. This shame fuels its restless energy. It may be seeking revenge against those who shamed it, or it may be doomed to endlessly reenact its humiliation. This adds another layer to the Hessian's story. As a mercenary, he was already seen as fighting without honor in the eyes of the colonists. His ignominious death by a random cannonball, followed by a likely unceremonious burial, would have been the ultimate dishonor. His ghostly form is thus a manifestation of eternal shame, a shame so powerful it refuses to stay buried. Finally, we must consider the act of seeing. The head contains the eyes, our primary organs of perception. The Headless Horseman is a being who is paradoxically blind, yet all-seeing. He has no eyes, yet he can navigate the darkest roads and relentlessly pursue his victim. This supernatural perception makes him even more terrifying. His blindness is not a weakness. It is a sign that he perceives the world in a way we cannot understand. He does not see with mortal eyes, but with some other, more terrible sense. He sees your fear, he sees your guilt, he sees your fate. He is a being of pure, intuitive knowledge. This is why the Dullahan's head, held under his arm, is so significant. It functions as a magical lantern, its dead eyes scanning the darkness. The head is not a passive, missing object. It is an active tool of perception. This transforms the head from a symbol of lost identity into a weapon of supernatural sight. The horseman is not blind. In fact, he sees more than we do. He sees the invisible threads of fate and mortality, and he has come to cut yours. When we gather all these symbolic threads, the Headless Horseman emerges not just as a ghost, but as a dense, multi-layered philosophical concept. He is the fear of physical annihilation, the terror of the unknowable, the dread of unreasoning force. He is the ghost of personal shame and the spectre of collective insanity. He represents the violent suppression of identity and the ultimate failure of communication. He is a reminder that our sense of self is fragile, that our reason can be overthrown, and that there are forces in the universe that operate on a logic far older and more terrifying than our own. The horseman endures because he is not just one thing. He is a repository for a host of our deepest fears, a shadowy figure upon which we can project our anxieties about death, identity, sanity, and the dark, irrational forces that gallop just beyond the firelight of our own consciousness. He is the ultimate faceless fear, and because he is faceless, he can wear any face we choose to give him. He is the ghost of war, the demon of folklore, the bogeyman of our childhood, and the dark symbol of our own internal chaos. He is all of these things at once. And that is why, even after 200 years, the sound of his hoofbeats can still make our blood run cold. A story once told ceases to belong to its author. It escapes the confines of the page and enters the public domain of the imagination. It becomes a living thing, subject to the whims of retelling, reinterpretation, and reinvention. A truly powerful story does not just endure, it evolves. It is reborn again and again, each time dressed in the fashions and anxieties of the new era that has adopted it. Few myths have proven more adaptable, more resilient to the passage of time than that of the Headless Horseman. The figure that Washington Irving captured in the amber of his prose was one of perfect, haunting ambiguity. A spectre that might be a ghost or might be a man. A legend balanced on the knife edge between supernatural horror and human mischief. For over a century, this is largely how he remained. A creature of literature and the stage, a classic of the American Gothic tradition. But as the 20th century dawned and new forms of media began to reshape the very way we tell stories, the horseman was summoned once more. He was called to leave the misty, literary hollows of the 19th century and ride into the bright, flickering light of the screen. This journey from folklore to pop culture was not a simple transfer. It was a profound transformation. With each rebirth, a piece of the old legend was sacrificed, and something new was forged in its place. The ambiguity was chipped away, the motives clarified, the horror amplified or softened to suit the tastes of a new audience. The story of the horseman's life in pop culture is the story of how we, as a society, have repeatedly confronted, reshaped, and ultimately tried to tame our most famous ghost. It is a journey that begins, as so many modern myths do, in the kingdom of the mouse. In 1949, the world was a different place. The horrors of the Second World War were fresh in the collective memory, and America was settling into a new era of prosperity and suburban comfort. There was a powerful cultural yearning for nostalgia, for simpler times, for stories that affirmed a sense of wholesome, small-town American identity. It was in this environment that Walt Disney Productions released The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, an animated package film containing 2 adaptations of classic British and American literature. The second half of this film was dedicated to the legend of Sleepy Hollow. It would become the single most influential portrayal of the legend in history, cementing the image of the Headless Horseman in the minds of millions for generations to come. The Disney version is a masterclass in calculated transformation. The studio's goal was to take a dark, atmospheric ghost story and make it palatable for a family audience without completely neutering its terrifying core. The key to this delicate balancing act was the film's narrator, the warm, reassuring, and impossibly smooth voice of Bing Crosby. From the very first frame, Crosby's crooning narration acts as a comforting blanket. He frames the story not as a grim tale of horror, but as a charming piece of American folklore, a spooky yarn to be enjoyed from a safe distance. He is the friendly storyteller sitting by the fire, winking at the audience, assuring us that it's all in good fun. This tone sanitizes the characters. Ichabod Crane is no longer Irving's complex figure of intellectual arrogance and deep-seated superstition. He is an unabashed gold digger and a glutton, a pure comic buffoon whose lanky, absurd movements are played for maximum laughs. Brombones is similarly flattened, transformed from a genuinely menacing local bully into a handsome, lovable oaf, a classic Disney himbo whose pranks are mischievous but never truly cruel. The conflict is a simple cartoon love triangle, but when the sun goes down and Ichabod begins his fateful ride home, the film undergoes a radical shift in tone. The comforting narrator falls silent. The music swells from a jaunery tune into a discordant, terrifying orchestral score. The charming, brightly colored world of the daytime gives way to a landscape of expressionistic, skeletal trees and deep, oppressive shadows. And then, the horseman appears. The creature that Disney's animators unleashed upon the screen is arguably more terrifying than anything Irving's prose could ever fully conjure. This is not an ambiguous shadow. This is a demon. He is a massive, broad-shouldered figure clad in a swirling purple cape, wielding a gleaming, wickedly sharp sword. His horse is a demonic beast of pure muscle and shadow, with glowing red eyes and a bestial fury. But the masterstroke is the head. Instead of carrying a human head, the Disney horseman carries a flaming jack-o'-lantern, its carved face locked in a manic, cackling grin. He hurls it not as a simple projectile, but as a fireball. This one creative choice forever fused the Headless Horseman with the imagery of Halloween, turning him into the holiday's unofficial Dark Knight. The final chase sequence is a tour de force of animated horror. It is dynamic, relentless, and filled with a palpable sense of kinetic dread. The horseman's demonic, echoing laughter, provided by the actor Billy Bletcher, the voice of the big bad wolf, became the definitive sound of the character. It is not the laugh of a ghost, it is the laugh of a devil enjoying its work. Disney's legend created a powerful and lasting cultural duality. It made the story safe, transforming it into a piece of nostalgic Americana. But it made the monster more iconic and viscerally terrifying than ever before. It codified his image, giving him the flaming pumpkin and the demonic laugh that would become his trademark. It took Irving's ambiguous ghost and split him in two. A charming, family-friendly Halloween character on one hand and a genuine sword-wielding demon on the other. This was the first great rebirth, and it made the Horseman a global superstar. For 50 years, the Disney version remained the definitive screen adaptation. The Horseman appeared in comics, on television specials, and as a walk-around character in theme parks, almost always in his Disney-fied form. He was a safe scare. Then, in 1999, at the turn of the millennium, a new master of the macabre summoned the Horseman for his second great rebirth. That master was Tim Burton. Burton's Sleepy Hollow was not an adaptation. It was a radical deconstruction. It took Irving's story, strip-mined it for its iconic imagery, and rebuilt it from the ground up as a full-blown R-rated gothic horror film. If Disney sought to comfort, Burton sought to disturb. He threw Bing Crosby's warm blanket into the fire and replaced it with a cold, blood-soaked shroud. The most fundamental change was to the character of Ichabod Crane. Played by Johnny Depp, he is no longer a superstitious and cowardly schoolmaster. In a complete inversion of the original, he is now a man of science, a rationalist police constable from New York City who relies on logic, forensics, and bizarre steampunk-esque scientific gadgets. He does not believe in ghosts. He is sent to Sleepy Hollow to investigate a series of gruesome decapitations and prove that the killer is a man of flesh and blood. The central conflict is no longer superstition versus reality, but science versus the supernatural. This, in turn, required a complete overhaul of the Horseman himself. He could no longer be an ambiguous legend or a prank. For Ichabod's scientific worldview to be shattered, the monster had to be undeniably, physically real. Burton's horseman is not a ghost. He is a corporeal entity, a resurrected Hessian mercenary, played with feral, sharp-toothed glee by Christopher Walken in flashbacks, who was killed during the Revolution. He is a supernatural killing machine, a weaponized corpse summoned from his grave by black magic. He is not searching for his head out of some tragic, restless impulse. He is retrieving it because his skull is the key to controlling him, and he slaughters anyone who gets in his way. He has a backstory, a clear motive, and a human master pulling his strings. The ambiguity that was the very soul of Irving's story is utterly obliterated. Burton's film is a murder mystery, and it provides a clear, albeit supernatural, solution. The horror is no longer psychological. It is visceral. The film revels in its decapitations, presenting them with a kind of gruesome, artistic flair. Heads are lopped off, sent flying through the air, and used to cauterize wounds. This is not a quaint folktale. It is a slasher film with a historical, gothic aesthetic. The Horseman had completed his transformation from a spectral omen into a modern movie monster, a peer of Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. He was now a character in his own right, a demonic anti-hero with a cult following. As the 21st century progressed, the Horseman continued his ride into new media, most notably the world of video games. Here, he underwent his third great transformation, from a figure of narrative horror to a figure of interactive challenge. In the world of games, monsters are not just things to be feared. They are obstacles to be overcome, systems to be mastered, and, most importantly, sources of reward. This process of gamification is perfectly encapsulated in the massively multiplayer online role-playing game World of Warcraft. Every year, during the game's Hallows End event, players can queue up to fight the Headless Horseman. He appears in a flash of green fire, riding his spectral steed and shouting a series of rhyming couplets that lay out his tragic backstory before the fight begins. "It is time for your doom, for the Horseman is here," he cries, his voice a pastiche of the Disney version's demonic glee. The fight itself is a structured, mechanical dance. Players must learn his attack patterns, avoid the fiery patches he leaves on the ground, and attack the disembodied head when it appears. He is a boss battle. His terror is replaced by a set of mechanics. His menace is a temporary difficulty spike. Upon his defeat, he doesn't just vanish, he explodes in a shower of treasure. Players are rewarded with gear, special items, and, if they are very lucky, the grand prize, the ability to summon and ride his fiery steed for themselves. The transformation is now complete. The terrifying omen of death from Irish folklore, the ambiguous spectre of American literature, the demonic villain of Disney, the gothic slasher of Tim Burton, has become a loot piñata. His legend has been condensed into a repeatable 15-minute encounter. The ultimate fear is not just confronted, but defeated, controlled, and its power claimed by the player. The horse that once carried a harbinger of doom now carries a player to their next quest. This pattern of adaptation and reappropriation continues across the media landscape. In the TV series Supernatural, the Horseman becomes a monster of the week, a case file for the ghost-hunting Winchester brothers, his legend another piece of lore to be researched and exploited. The Fox television series Sleepy Hollow performed the most radical reinvention of all, turning Ichabod Crane into a time-traveling Revolutionary War soldier, and the Horseman into one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, specifically death. The quaint, local ghost story was inflated into an epic, world-ending supernatural conspiracy, blending elements of a buddy cop procedural with biblical prophecy. Each of these rebirths tells us something about the era that produced it. Disney's version reflects a post-war desire for safe, nostalgic entertainment. Burton's reflects a 90s fascination with dark, revisionist history and gothic anti-heroes. The Horseman of World of Warcraft reflects a modern, interactive culture that seeks to master and control its fears, to turn monsters into conquerable content. The television shows reflect a genre-blending era where ancient myths are readily plugged into modern, serialized formulas. The Headless Horseman has proven to be perhaps the most versatile monster in the American canon. His core concept, the terrifying image of a powerful, headless rider, is so potent so instantly recognizable that it can survive almost any transformation. He can be a ghost, a demon, a resurrected corpse, or a cosmic entity. He can be the villain of a children's cartoon, a gothic slasher film, a video game, or an apocalyptic drama. He has been tamed, explained, defeated, and demystified 1,000 times over, and yet the original fear remains. Beneath all these layers of pop culture interpretation, beneath the flaming pumpkins and the epic backstories and the loot tables, the core terror of Irving's original vision endures. It is the fear of the dark road, the fear of the unknown pursuer, the fear of a menace that cannot be reasoned with. The horseman continues to ride because he is a cultural mirror. Each generation sees its own reflection in the dark space where his head ought to be. And as long as there are lonely roads and stories to be told in the dark, he will be out there, waiting for the next storyteller to summon him, to give him a new face, or lack thereof, for a new age. His legend, it seems, is as deathless as he is. A legend, once it becomes popular, faces a peculiar and perilous fate. It risks being loved to death. The Headless Horseman, after his long and celebrated ride through the multiplexes and video arcades of the 20th and 21st centuries, would seem to be a prime candidate for this demise. He has been explained, deconstructed, gamified, and commercialized. His face, or lack thereof, adorns everything from Halloween decorations to theme park rides. He is no longer a whisper in the dark. He is a brand. In a world so saturated with his image, a world of noise and irony and endless media, it seems almost impossible that the original, genuine haunting could survive. How can a true ghost compete with its own celebrity? And yet, the stories persist. They are no longer the common currency of an isolated, superstitious community. They are quieter now, more scattered, told with a degree of hesitation or even embarrassment. They are the anecdotes of the late-night commuter, the hushed confessions of a local historian, the fragmented data on a paranormal investigator's hard drive. They are strange blooms of primal fear pushing up through the concrete of our modern, rational world. They suggest that beneath the polished veneer of pop culture, the original spectre, the true ghost of the hollow, may still be out there, riding through the darkness, entirely indifferent to its own fame. To find it, we must leave the world of fiction behind and venture into the ambiguous, unsettling territory of eyewitness accounts, a realm where folklore is not a thing of the past, but a living, breathing, and terrifying phenomenon. Our investigation begins where the legend was born, in the shadowed lanes of Sleepy Hollow, New York. The town itself is a paradox. By day, it is a site of pilgrimage for fans of the legend. Tourists walk the grounds of the old Dutch church, pose for photos by the Headless Horseman bridge, and buy miniature pumpkin-headed souvenirs in the local shops. The town has embraced its haunted reputation, turning it into a thriving cottage industry. It feels, in the bright light of day, entirely safe, tamed. But when the tour buses leave and the autumn sun dips below the hills, a different character emerges. The modern world seems to recede, and the drowsy, dreamy influence that Washington Irving described begins to reassert itself. The winding, tree-lined roads, designed for horses and carriages rather than cars, seem to grow darker and more claustrophobic. The Pocantico River murmurs with secrets, and the weight of 300 years of history settles back over the land. It is then, in the quiet hours, that people still see him. The accounts, when gathered, form a consistent, chilling mosaic. They rarely involve a clear, cinematic vision of a caped rider with a flaming pumpkin. The reality, as it is told, is something far more subtle and unnerving. It often begins with a sound. A man driving home late from the city, taking the winding route along Route 9, past the Rockefeller State Park Preserve. The night is still, the road empty. He turns off the radio, and then he hears it. A rhythmic, percussive sound, muffled but distinct, keeping pace with his car. It is not the sound of another vehicle. It is organic. It is the sound of hoofbeats. He checks his mirrors. Nothing. The road behind him is a black void. He slows down, thinking perhaps it's an echo, a trick of the acoustics in the valley. But the sound persists, a steady, galloping cadence that seems to come not from the road, but from the dark woods that press in on either side. A feeling of profound, inexplicable dread begins to creep up his spine. He accelerates, and for a terrifying moment, the hoofbeats accelerate with him, before abruptly vanishing, leaving only the hum of his own engine and the frantic pounding of his own heart. Others describe a visual anomaly, a trick of the light that refuses to be dismissed. A group of teenagers on a dare parked near the old churchyard on a moonless night. They sit in the car, telling ghost stories, their nervous laughter echoing in the small space. Then one of them points. At the edge of the woods, where the darkness is deepest, there is a shape. It is a silhouette, impossibly tall and broad, perched atop what looks like a large animal. It is utterly black, a hole in the fabric of the night. It does not move. They stare, transfixed, their laughter dying in their throats. Is it a strangely shaped tree, a shadow cast by a distant, unseen light? They try to reason it away, but the shape holds. It has the undeniable outline of a man on a horse. As they watch, it seems to drift, not walk, a few feet to the left, before melting back into the undifferentiated darkness from which it emerged. They do not wait to see if it will return. These modern sightings are characterized by their fleeting, ambiguous nature. They are sensory fragments that leave a powerful emotional residue. There is the tale of the park ranger locking up a gate at dusk who feels a sudden bone-deep drop in temperature and is overwhelmed by the smell of damp earth and something else. Something coppery, like old blood. Or the local librarian, an expert on the area's history, who swears that on certain nights, if you stand near the spot of the old bridge, you can hear a single, desperate shout carried on the wind, followed by a wet, sickening thud. These are not grand theatrical appearances. They are psychic impressions, moments of deep temporal dislocation, as if the witness has accidentally tuned into a grim, repeating broadcast from the past. Folklorists and paranormal researchers have a term for this kind of phenomenon: place memory, or the stone tape theory. It is the speculative idea that powerful, traumatic events can leave a kind of energetic imprint on their physical location. This recording is not a conscious, interactive spirit, but a psychic residue that can be replayed under certain atmospheric or psychological conditions. The landscape itself becomes the haunted medium. From this perspective, the Headless Horseman is not a thinking entity. He is a scar on the valley, a psychic wound left by the trauma of the revolution that has never fully healed. The sounds and shadows are not a ghost hunting for its head. They are the echoes of a real man's violent death, trapped in an endless loop. The people who experience these things are not being haunted. They are simply standing in the right place, at the right time, to witness the playback. But the haunting is not confined to this one small valley in New York. The ghost, it seems, remembers its European roots. In the rural counties of Ireland, far from the tourist trails of Dublin, stories of the Dullahan persist, albeit with the same modern reticence. They are tales told late at night in quiet pubs, spoken in hushed tones. A farmer will tell of driving his tractor down a narrow boreen, a country lane, when his engine suddenly died. The electronics were dead. As he sat in the sudden, profound silence, he heard the sound of a galloping horse approaching at incredible speed. Knowing the old stories, he squeezed his eyes shut and did not dare to look, praying it would pass. The sound grew to a deafening thunder, and he felt a rush of cold air as something immense and powerful shot past his tractor, shaking it on its springs. When he opened his eyes, he was alone, and his engine started on the first try. He never saw anything, but he knows what it was. The Dullahan does not like to be seen. In the Black Forest of Germany, a region steeped in the folklore of the wild hunt, similar tales are told. Hikers who have stayed on the trails after dusk speak of a sudden, oppressive feeling of being watched, of a deep, guttural horn blast echoing from a valley where no hunter should be. There is a specific legend attached to a stretch of the B500 road, a high-altitude scenic route that winds through the dense forest. Drivers have reported seeing a lone, dark figure on horseback, standing on the verge of the road at night. When their headlights sweep across it, the figure appears solid for a moment before vanishing completely. Most chilling are the accounts of those who claim the figure had no head, just the high, stiff collar of an old-fashioned coat. Is this a modern echo of Hans Jagenteufel, or perhaps the ghost of a World War II soldier, another victim of another brutal conflict? Or is it something older, a spirit of the forest itself, a timeless entity for whom all of humanity's wars are but fleeting moments of noisy intrusion? These European sightings serve as a powerful reminder that the Hessian of Sleepy Hollow was just one manifestation of a much older, more widespread fear, a fear that still lingers in the dark corners of the old world. This persistent desire to find evidence, to move beyond anecdote and capture definitive proof, brings us to the modern era of paranormal investigation. In the 21st century, we no longer rely solely on our fallible senses. We have technology. Ghost hunting has evolved from a spiritualist seance into a quasi-scientific field exercise. Teams armed with EMF meters, full-spectrum cameras, thermal imagers, and digital audio recorders descend upon haunted locations, hoping to capture a signal in the static, a ghost in the machine. Sleepy Hollow, naturally, is a prime location. Imagine a team of these modern-day ghost hunters setting up their vigil at the site of the bridge. The air is cold and still. Their equipment is a constellation of small, blinking LED lights in the darkness. They begin their session, a ritualistic process of provocation and documentation. An investigator will start an EVP, electronic voice phenomena, session, asking questions into the void, his digital recorder running, hoping to capture a disembodied voice in the white noise. "Is there a Hessian soldier here with us tonight?" he might ask. "Can you tell us your name? What are you looking for?" They might use a spirit box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies, creating a bed of audio fragments from which proponents believe spirits can pluck words to form messages. For hours, nothing happens. The meters are silent. The air is still. Then, a K2 meter, which detects fluctuations in the electromagnetic field, suddenly flashes its lights from green to yellow to red. The team's energy spikes. They converge on the hot spot. "Is that you?" the investigator asks. "Can you make that device light up again if you're here?" The lights flash again in seeming response. At the same time, another team member, monitoring audio through headphones, hears something, a faint, rhythmic sound on the recording. It is too structured for wind, too muffled for footsteps. It sounds, he will later claim, like a horse at a canter. Another investigator, watching a thermal camera, points out a cold spot, a vaguely man-shaped patch of air that is several degrees colder than its surroundings, which seems to drift slowly before dissipating. They will pack up at dawn, their minds racing. Back in their makeshift lab, they will analyze the data. The EVP recording, when amplified, will reveal what sounds like a whisper, a guttural sound that some might interpret as the German word Kopf, meaning head. The rhythmic sound will be isolated and looped, its cadence eerily similar to a galloping horse. The thermal footage and EMF spikes will be presented as corroborating evidence. They will have their findings. But what have they actually captured? Is it the voice of a restless spirit or an auditory pareidolia, the brain's desperate attempt to find meaning in random noise? Is it a genuine cold spot or a simple draft? Is the EMF spike evidence of a ghost or interference from a passing car's alternator? The evidence is tantalizing, but it is never conclusive. It exists in a perpetual state of what if. The modern paranormal investigation, in the end, does not solve the mystery. It simply translates the old ghost story into a new, technological language. It gives us data points instead of folktales, but the fundamental ambiguity remains. This brings us to the most difficult and most important question of all. In a world awash with the horseman's image, why do these experiences persist? The answer may lie not in the external world of spirits and specters, but in the internal world of the human mind. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, evolved to find order in chaos. This powerful survival tool, however, can sometimes work too well. The psychological phenomenon of pareidolia is the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern, seeing a face in the clouds or the man in the moon. Could the sighting of a dark, rider-like shape in the woods be an extreme form of visual pareidolia, the brain taking the ambiguous data of shadow and tree limbs and forcing it into a familiar, culturally primed template? The phenomenon of apophenia is its conceptual cousin, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. Hearing the sound of a branch snapping while feeling a sudden chill and remembering a ghost story could lead the brain to construct a causal narrative. a ghost has arrived. The human mind abhors a vacuum of meaning. It will build a story to connect the dots, and in a place like Sleepy Hollow, the story it is most likely to build is the one it already knows. We must also consider the strange and suggestible states of human consciousness. The lone driver on a dark road is a recurring trope in these sightings. Long-distance driving, especially at night, can induce a mild, trance-like state, a form of highway hypnosis. The line between waking and dreaming can blur. The hypnagogic state, the moments just before falling asleep, and the hypnopompic state, the moments just upon waking, are known to be fertile ground for vivid auditory and visual hallucinations. Could the commuter who hears hoofbeats be experiencing a brief, waking dream, his tired mind projecting a sound from the deep well of his subconscious, a subconscious shaped by years of hearing the legend? We have come to the end of our journey. We have followed the trail of hoof prints and blood from the quiet lanes of modern-day Sleepy Hollow, back through the centuries, through war and folklore, across oceans and into the deepest, most shadowed corners of the human psyche. We have dissected the legend, analyzed the sightings, and explored the symbolism. We have asked the question, is he real? In a dozen different ways, examining him as a ghost of history, a demon of myth, a glitch in our own perception, a monster of the silver screen. We have held each theory up to the light, searching for a definitive answer, for a final, satisfying explanation that would allow us to file the case away, to close the book on the Headless Horseman and sleep soundly. But there is no final answer. There is no neat conclusion, because we have been asking the wrong question all along. The ultimate horror of the Headless Horseman is not whether he is real or not. The ultimate horror is that it does not matter. His existence is not dependent on our belief, nor on the flickering readings of a ghost hunter's equipment. He represents a truth so fundamental, so inescapable, that he would exist even if the story had never been told. The legend of Sleepy Hollow did not create a monster. It merely gave a name and a shape to something that has been riding behind humanity since the very beginning. He is, in his purest form, a memento mori, a reminder of death. But he is not the gentle, skeletal figure of death seen in medieval woodcuts, the patient ferryman who comes for us all in our own time. He is a far more modern and terrifying vision of mortality. He is death as a predator. He is the sudden, violent, and unreasoning end. He is the cannonball you never saw coming, the drunk driver crossing the center line, the genetic anomaly ticking like a time bomb in your cells. He is the brutal, senseless termination of a story that feels unfinished. He is the chase that you will eventually lose. We tell ourselves stories to keep this truth at bay. We build societies, religions, and philosophies as elaborate fortifications against the encroaching darkness. We convince ourselves that life has meaning, that there is a purpose to our striving, that our consciousness, our self, is a thing of substance and permanence. The Headless Horseman is the ghost that haunts this machine. He is the personification of the void, the embodiment of meaninglessness. His lack of a head is not just a physical trait, it is a metaphysical statement. It is the visual representation of a universe that has no mind, no consciousness, and no concern for our hopes, our fears, or our desperate pleas for just a little more time. He is the ultimate symbol of a cosmos that is utterly indifferent to our existence. Think of it. When you look up at the night sky, you are staring into a headless void. The vast, silent emptiness of space does not think, it does not feel, it does not reason, it simply is. And against that backdrop, our lives, our entire civilization, are a brief, fragile flicker of warmth and light. The horseman is a piece of that void, broken off and given a terrestrial form. He is the ambassador of the great, silent, unthinking darkness, sent to remind us of our place. He is the cold of space, wearing a horseman's cloak. His connection to the past is what gives him his chilling immediacy. He is not just a symbol of the death that awaits us in the future. He is a ghost of the past that we can never truly escape. We like to believe in progress, in the idea that we are moving forward, that we are more enlightened than the generations that came before us. We pave over the battlefields, we build monuments, we write history books that neatly package the chaos of the past into a coherent narrative. We tell ourselves we have learned our lessons. The horseman laughs at this. His very existence is a mockery of our belief in progress. He is the spectre of war, a reminder that the price of our nations, our freedoms, our very ways of life was paid in blood and horror. He is the restless spirit of every soldier buried in an unmarked grave, every victim of a conflict whose name has been forgotten. He is the trauma we have inherited, the violence that is encoded in our DNA. Every time a new war breaks out, every time we give in to our tribal hatreds and our capacity for brutality, we are summoning him. He is the proof that the past is not dead. It is not even past. It is riding just behind us, keeping pace. And he represents something more intimate, more personal. He is the fear of being forgotten. He is the embodiment of our own fading lore. We strive to make our mark, to leave a legacy, to ensure that our name and our story will survive our physical death. We build careers, we raise families, we create art, we fill the world with pieces of ourselves, hoping they will anchor our memory in the minds of others. The horseman is the spectre of oblivion. His headless state is the ultimate symbol of anonymity. He has no name, no face, no identity that can be remembered. He is the final state of all things, the slow, inexorable erosion of memory, until nothing remains but a nameless, faceless shadow. He rides for all the stories that have been lost, for all the names that have been erased by time. And one day, he will ride for yours. Whether he exists or not, he is already here. He is in the flicker of anxiety you feel when you walk down a poorly lit street at night. He is in the sudden, stomach-dropping realization of your own mortality that can strike at any moment. He is in the dread that settles in your heart when you hear news of a distant tragedy, a quiet whisper that reminds you of the world's inherent fragility. He is in the uneasy feeling that the life you have built, with all its routines and comforts, is a thin sheet of ice over a deep, dark, and turbulent ocean. The stories we have told, the sightings we have analyzed, they are not about him. They are about us. They are the artifacts of our attempts to grapple with these terrifying truths. We give him a name, a backstory, a specific hunting ground, because it is too horrifying to confront what he truly represents in its raw, undiluted form. It is easier to fear a ghost in a particular valley than it is to fear the fundamental nature of existence. It is more comforting to believe in a vengeful Hessian soldier than it is to accept the idea of a mindless, indifferent universe. The legend is a containment protocol. It is a cage we have built around an unnameable terror to make it small enough to manage, but the cage is weak, the bars are rusted, and sometimes the thing inside gets out. It gets out when you are driving alone, late at night. The road ahead is a tunnel of light carved out of an infinite darkness. The rhythmic thump of the tires on the asphalt is hypnotic. Your mind begins to drift. You are caught between the world of the living and the world of the road, a world of pure motion and shadow. And for a split second, you catch a glimpse of something in your rearview mirror, a shape that is too tall, too dark. You blink and it's gone, but the feeling remains, a cold knot in the pit of your stomach, a sudden prickling awareness of the vast, empty darkness that surrounds your small, fragile bubble of steel and glass. You have just been reminded. It gets out when you are lying in bed, in that quiet hour before dawn, when the world is at its most still. A strange sound from downstairs jolts you awake. The house is settling, you tell yourself. The wind. But the sound was too precise, too deliberate. You lie there, every nerve ending alive, straining to hear it again. The familiar geography of your own home has become alien territory. Every shadow is a hiding place. Every creak of the floorboards is a footstep. You are no longer the master of your domain. You are prey, holding your breath, listening for the hunter. You have just been reminded. The Headless Horseman is not a story that you can choose to believe or disbelieve. He is a condition of being alive. He is the price of consciousness. He is the eternal pursuer, the embodiment of all the fears we try so desperately to outrun. But he is a patient rider. He knows that he does not need to catch us. He knows that sooner or later, we will all falter. Our strength will fail, our hope will dim, and we will stumble. And in that final moment, when all our stories and all our certainties have been stripped away, we will finally understand. We will turn to face the darkness that has been following us all our lives, and we will see him there, pulling his black steed to a halt. We will see the terrible emptiness where a head should be, and we will hear the silence of a universe that has nothing to say. He never stops riding, and sometimes if the night is still and cold enough, if you listen very, very carefully, you'll hear him behind you.